Chapter 9, Lesson 1, Americans and the Revolution. What to know? How did the American Revolution affect people's lives? Describe the personal and economic impacts of the war. Explain the role of women during the war. Identify the roles of African Americans and American Indians during the war. Patriot, loyalist, neutral, inflation, profiteering, regiment. Martha Washington, Deborah Sampson, Mercy Otis Warren, Abigail Adams, James Armistead, Chief Logan, Thea Deganea. That's my best guess. Americans and the Revolution. You are there. It is 1777. Hundreds of British soldiers are marching past your house in New Jersey. The rattle of their swords makes you shiver as your mother pulls you and your little brother close. For 3 months, your father has been away fighting in the Continental Army. While he is gone, your mother has been running the family's printing business. Outside, the last of the British soldiers are passing. Their coats make a line of red across the street. "Don't worry," you whisper to your brother. "We'll beat them all. You'll see." This photograph shows historical reenactors dressed as British soldiers. Fast fact: when a British soldier was hit by a bullet, his bright red uniform kept nearby soldiers from knowing he was bleeding. This helped prevent the other soldiers from getting scared and running away from the battle. This painting detail shows British soldiers burning a family's home. Personal hardships. The approval of the Declaration of Independence showed that the colonial leaders had united against Britain, but the colonists themselves were not united. Many faced the difficult decision of whether to support independence or to remain loyal to the British king. People in the colonies who supported independence called themselves patriots. Those who remained loyal to the king called themselves loyalists. Some colonists, however, chose to be neutral. They took neither side. As people took sides, towns, friendships, and families were sometimes torn apart. One patriot woman stayed in Boston while loyalist members of her family moved away. She wrote, quote, "When I seriously reflect that I have lost my father, mother, brother, and sisters, I am half distracted in shock." Colonists faced other personal hardships. Often their towns were robbed and destroyed by the British Army. In 1776, for example, British soldiers burned many areas of New Jersey. They even stole beds from colonist houses. In some cases, the colonists destroyed their own possessions to keep the British from taking them. Some patriot men and women burned their crops before the British Army arrived. Their actions made sure that the British could not harvest the crops for food. Reading check. What was the effect of the war on some colonial families? American imports from Britain. Value in British pounds and the year. So the value ranging from, let's see, we have 200,000 up to 800,000. So American imports from Britain greatly increased. And this looks like a continental. The currency, the continental currency. Economic hardships. Economic hardships. Americans faced economic as well as personal hardships during the Revolutionary War. One problem was the shortage of imported goods. British ships set up blockades so that other ships could not unload goods at American ports. As the shortage of goods grew worse, Americans faced severe wartime inflation, which is an increase in the price of goods. Inflation meant that the colonists needed more money to buy goods and services. In just 2 months, the price of wheat and beef doubled. Inflation. Another cause of inflation was the falling value of continental money. In order to pay for the war, the Second Continental Congress was printing more currency. By printing too much, however, the government caused its money to become less valuable. Aside from inflation, another problem Congress had trying to finance or pay for the war was that it could not raise money through taxes. The states had to give permission before new tax laws could be passed. To make matters worse, some farmers and shopkeepers began profiteering, charging extra high prices for their crops or goods. Laws were soon passed saying how much farmers could charge for food. These laws also made it illegal for people to hoard or collect and hide large amounts of goods and materials. Often, however, these laws were ignored. What effect did inflation have on the economy during the Revolutionary War? Women and the war. As men left their homes to fight in the war, women took on new roles. Some women ran family farms or businesses. They worked as carpenters, blacksmiths, wagon drivers, and shipbuilders. Others formed groups to raise money for the war and collect clothing for the soldiers. Some wives followed their husbands from battle to battle. In army camps, women cooked food and washed clothes. Some brought water to soldiers during battles. Every winter, Martha Washington traveled to be with her husband George. Some brave girls and women joined the men in battle. One night in 1777, 16-year-old Sybil Ludington rode on horseback to tell American soldiers of a British attack. Deborah Sampson, dressed in men's clothes to fight, calling herself Robert Shirtliff. Margaret Corbin was badly wounded after taking her husband's place in battle. Corbin became the first woman war veteran to be recognized by Congress. Some women used their talents to support the Patriot cause. Mercy Otis Warren wrote patriotic poems and stories that often showed women heroes fighting for freedom. Later, she wrote a history of the American Revolution, the first by a woman. Abigail Adams argued for freedom in letters she wrote to her husband, John, our second president, John Adams. She also offered rooms in her home for children who had been made homeless by the war. What different roles did women play during the American Revolution? Many different roles. We have Sybil Ludington, Abigail Adams, and Martha Washington. James Armistead Wright spied on the British Army. African Americans in the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, above, fought for the Patriots to gain their own freedom. African Americans, free and enslaved. At the start of the war, 1 out of every 5 people in the 13 colonies was of African descent. 1 out of every 5, about 20%. Most lived as slaves in the southern colonies. African Americans everywhere in the colonies, however, recognized the promise of the Declaration of Independence. It had, after all, stated that, quote, all men are created equal. About 5,000 African Americans fought for the Continental Army. Many were promised their freedom as a reward for their service. This was the case for the soldiers in the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. A regiment is a large group of soldiers. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment fought bravely in several major battles during the war. James Armistead, a Virginia slave, served as a spy for George Washington. The information that Armistead collected helped win an important battle at Yorktown. After the war, the Virginia government gave him his freedom. Virginia's British governor also promised freedom to all slaves who fought for the British. He formed a regiment of more than 300 African Americans who wore patches that said "Liberty to Slaves." Free African Americans were as quick to take sides. Peter Salem was among at least 5 African Americans who fought at the Battle of Concord. James Forten, a free African American from Philadelphia, was 14 years old when he joined the Continental Navy. Why did enslaved African Americans fight in the Revolutionary War? People in the Western lands. Despite the proclamation of 1763, settlers had continued to move onto the lands set aside for American Indians. Some Indian groups were angry about these settlers, but many depended on both the Americans and the British as trading partners. When the Revolutionary War began, many American Indian groups chose to remain neutral. In 1775, one member of the Oneida tribe said, quote, we are unwilling to join either side. However, American Indian loyalties were soon divided. In the Revolutionary War, both the Americans and the British formed alliances with Indian groups. The Mohawk leader and other Iroquois warriors fought for the British. The king gave this medal to the Iroquois as a symbol of friendship. Mingo chief Logan chose to fight on the side of the British. In 1774, frontier settlers had killed his family. This caused Logan to fight against the Americans. The Mohawk leader, Thayendanegea, known as Joseph Brant, also fought for the British. The Mohawk members of the Iroquois League hoped to prevent more Americans from settling on their lands. Other Indian nations of the League also allied with the British. However, the Oneida and Tuscarora nations decided to fight for the Americans. These opposing alliances led to the end of the League, the Iroquois League. Like many American Indians, most settlers in the western lands remained neutral at first. After a while, however, their feelings began to change. Although many did not support the Patriot cause, they wanted to drive the British out of the western lands. These settlers valued their freedom and did not want to be ruled by a strong government. About 1/3 of all Americans chose to remain neutral throughout the Revolutionary War. At Johnson Hall in New York, the British met with their American Indian allies. So what caused some American Indian groups to make alliances with the British? Summary. During the Revolutionary War, Americans faced personal and economic hardships. Many women and African Americans contributed to the Patriot cause. At first, settlers in the western lands and American Indians were neutral, but later they joined the fighting. Explain the difference between a loyalist, a colonial loyalist, also known as a Tory, and a patriot. Why did Congress have problems financing the war?